Hi, I'm Mike Beliveau, and today I'm going to be discussing another great classic Western TV series, The Virginian. Now, as usual, I'm going to provide some background on the show first, and then I'll talk about the guns. So, if you only came for the guns, what I recommend you do is use that magic fast forward button on your computer or phone and skip ahead until you see a gun, and then stop it and start watching right there, and you won't have to complain about how long it took me to get to the guns, because it's going to take me a while. Now, the Virginian originally aired here in the USA on the NBC television network, and it ran from 1962 until 1971. And that 9-year run made it the third longest running Western in TV history. It was behind Bonanza, and of course, Gunsmoke was number one. Now, the series was loosely based on Owen Wister's novel, The Virginian, A Horseman of the Plains. Now, Wister was a Philadelphia lawyer, and he was a member of, almost the top tier of society on the East Coast. But he fell in love with the West after vacationing there several times. And he ended up spending most of his free time out in the West. And wrote many short stories about it. And then he wrote The Virginian, which actually was kind of a combination of some of his earlier work put together in a novel form. Now, The Virginian's often called the first true Western novel. And even though it's pretty highly romanticized, you have to admit, it's really pretty accurate to the times. Wister knew what he was doing, and he was a keen observer of life out west, and all life, really. He had a novelist's eye for what was going on. So, these days the language might seem a little bit stilted, but really it's one of the best Western novels that you're ever going to read. I know this video is supposed to be about the TV show and not about the novel, but honestly, I can't help talking about both of them together because they're really tied together for me personally. As a kid, The Virginian is one of those shows that I really enjoyed. And because of how much I enjoyed the TV show, when I was 13 or 14, I decided to read the novel. And I was eager to get into it. But when I did, I was shocked because, to be honest with you, the novel is not like the TV show at all. Now, earlier I said the TV show was loosely based on the novel. And what I mean by that is I believe that the writers of the TV show took a script of the show and waved it about a foot over the top of a copy of the novel. And that's as close as they ever came to it. And, that's unfortunate, but the show is good in its own right. Cut. So when I say that the TV show is loosely based on the novel, what I mean is that the writers of the TV show took a copy of the script and they waved it about a foot above a copy of the novel. And that's about as close as they ever came to it. Certainly they never let the two of them touch. that is pretty obvious. So you've got a TV show that only shares a few things with the novel. One, the title. That's almost it, but not quite. There are 3 names from the novel that appear in the TV show. And one name that is almost the same. And it's set in Wyoming. That is like the sum total of what they have in common. They're both set not only in Wyoming, but roughly in Medicine Bow, Wyoming, which of course, if you live in Wyoming, it's a real place. Now, on the TV show, they can ride from the ranch into town anytime they want, and they're there in a few minutes. In the book, the ranch was 250 miles outside of Medicine Bow. It was like a 3-day ride. So that's a 3-day hard ride. It was Probably take you most of a week to actually to get there. So, which one's more realistic? I'll leave that up to you. Now, another thing I've really got to point out is in the TV series, Doug McClure plays Trampus. And on the TV series, he's a lovable, kind of mischievous, a little bit of a bad boy ranch hand on the Shiloh Ranch. Which, in the book, Trampus is the bad guy. He's the villain. He's a terrible person. And ultimately, the Virginian and Trampus face each other in a shootout on Main Street at the end of the book. And only one of them has supper that night. Now, when I started to read the book, and I realized that Trampus was a bad guy, I was appalled. Because Doug McClure's Trampus was my favorite character on the TV series. And I would hazard a guess that he was the most popular individual character on the series. And to make him a bad guy, that was just horrible for me. And it almost ruined the book. I'm glad I stuck with it. But the fact is, if I had read the book before I saw the TV show, I probably could not have looked at the TV show the same way. So probably it's good that I did it the other way around. So I can still keep Doug McClure in my head as a good guy and keep Trampus in my head as a bad guy. But that is quite a difference between the book and the TV show. So I told you that basically what the TV show had in common with the books was 3 character names. 2 of those characters made it the whole way through the 9 years of the series, and that's the Virginian, who was played by James Drury, and excellently played, I must say, and the aforementioned Trampus, who was played by Doug McClure, and it was a neat role for him, for sure. Now, the other characters I talked about, the first one's Gary Clark, and he played a ranch hand known as Steve Hill. But unfortunately, Steve Hill, as a character on the TV show, for reasons that I'm not sure of, only made it through 2 seasons. And they never gave an explanation for why they dropped him, and the producers said that they just decided that they were going to be dropping characters quite often, and there was no point in trying to get the audience up to speed as to why they were gone. It was better to just drop them. And in a few weeks, people would stop asking, hey, what happened to Steve? So that's what they did. And they actually did that with a couple of characters who were fairly important to the show over the years. They just disappeared them. So Steve went away after 2 seasons. The other character was Lee J. Cobb, who played Judge Henry Garth. Now, in the book, it was Judge Henry, no first name ever given. And Lee J. Cobb decided he did not like Henry as a last name for the judge. So he conceded that he would accept Henry as a first name for the judge, but that they should use the name Garth as the last name. And he was quite adamant about it, and he could be pretty stubborn, so it was easier to just go along with it. Now, Lee J. Cobb, who played Judge Henry Garth, was only on the show for 3.5 seasons. And that's so hard for me to believe because he made an incredible impression on me as a kid. When I reread The Virginian, I can't picture Judge Henry without picturing Lee J. Cobb. But apparently, Lee J. Cobb did not enjoy acting on The Virginian. He was already a very well-known movie actor and stage actor, and he thought that The Virginian was beneath his talents. And unfortunately, he was not afraid to tell that to anybody who asked. So when he gave an interview, he often had nothing good to say about the quality of the scripts or of his co-stars, that sort of thing. And he was quite unhappy, and he wanted out of his contract. Now, the funny thing is, Lee J. Cobb had gotten caught up in the McCarthy, communist hunting witch trials of the 1950s. And he's one of those guys who gave in to the committee and gave up a bunch of names. And because of that, he was really persona non grata in Hollywood for a while. And he did not work at all for a few years. So the Virginian was kind of a salvation for him in terms of career and making some money. So it's kind of unfortunate, and I did not know this as a kid, of course, that he didn't hesitate to bite the hand that fed him, which I think is a shame. But after 3.5 seasons, they let him go. And they did it because they thought that was just better for the show than having him, constantly running the show down whenever he was interviewed. So they let him out of his contract, which he had, I think, a 5 or 6 year contract. And he went on his merry way. And after that, it was kind of a revolving door of characters who replaced Lee J. Cobb as the patriarch on the show. So his replacements were John Denner, Charles Bickford, John McIntyre, who was my favorite, and Stuart Granger. And they did not play Judge Garth. They all played different characters who was like the mature, patriarch figure for the show while they were on it. But to me, none of them actually equaled the performance of Lee J. Cobb. So it's a shame that he couldn't just choke back his bad feelings and just keep going, because I thought he was excellent for that role. Now, the setting for the book basically spans the years like 1884 to the mid to late 1890s. But the TV show kind of went in another direction. And for the first season, it was set in 1898. And there were some ramifications of that. And in fact, the studio really wasn't happy with the original showrunner. And that was one of the things that they weren't happy about. And one of the things that they had in the original season is they had 2 or 3 episodes where the guys from the Shiloh Ranch, Steve Trampus and the Virginian, left the ranch and enlisted in the army and went to fight in the Spanish-American War. And they actually had them in the war as one of, 2 of the episodes, I think. And the studio thought that was just insane, because here you have a brand new show where it's bad enough that you have a new guest star every week, but you've got to establish some continuity and make people love the regular players so they'll keep coming back, right? And if you take them away from their standard setting and put them somewhere that can't possibly be a long-term thing, people don't adjust well to that. So for that reason and a lot of reasons, in the second season, they changed showrunners. And they set the date for the setting of the series at 1886. And the reason for that is they set it before the Great Blizzard. And they set it when the cattle prices were very high, when it was a great time to be a rancher. And then they just kept it there for the whole remaining 8 years. So you've got 1898 at the beginning, and you've got 1886 for the rest of the series. Now, The Virginian was a 90-minute TV series. So if you take out commercials, that was 75 minutes of actual scripted time. And that's a lot. I mean, that's basically like a feature movie. And they had to shoot one of those every week. And we're talking about the years when an American TV season was 30 to 33 episodes long, right? So for 33 weeks, they are shooting the equivalent of a feature film every week. And that was just a daunting schedule. It made it very difficult to shoot the series. In fact, they were often shooting 2 or 3 episodes at once. And what they would do is they would shoot all the scenes on one location for 2 or 3 episodes at one time. And if they didn't need everybody there for that, which they often didn't, they would shoot the scenes for another location with the other actors at the same time. So they would have like 2 film crews going at one time in order to get things done and hit their air dates. And of course, writing 90-minute scripted television shows is not the work of a moment. And they had quite a bit of trouble keeping up with scripts to have available for filming to make their air dates. And what they started doing was they started raiding their parent company, Universal's, archive of movie scripts. So they would pull a movie script out of the file and they would rewrite it quickly to fit the television show and then film it. That caused them some problems. And in one particular episode, which happens to be one of my favorites, it's an excellent episode, but there's probably a reason. It's titled The Duel at Shiloh. It's in the first season, very close to the end of the first season. And it's the Steve Hill origin story, basically. And it co-starred Brian Keith. Just an excellent show. Well, that was actually stolen or copied from a screenplay called A Man Without a Star that starred Kirk Douglas. Now, the problem is they didn't pay enough attention to how fresh that script was. And as they ended up, the Duel at Shiloh episode ran on TV while some theaters were still showing The Man Without a Star, in the movie theaters. But luckily they had changed it enough that people didn't seem to put 2 and 2 together, but they sweated that when they realized what had happened. They thought they would get some blowback from that. But it turned out to be a good idea because the script was quite good. And Duel at Shiloh ended up being just a top-notch episode with Brian Keith turning in a fantastic performance. Now, in its 9 seasons, the Virginian had hundreds of guest stars. And this was an era where for this kind of show, the producers thought that the guest stars made the show. So guest stars were often paid more than the regular cast was. But obviously 9 seasons, 30 episodes a season, a lot of guest stars. Because of that, I'm not going to try to go through all the guns that most of the guest stars had, because safe to say, unlike a lot of shows that really went for variety, the Virginian was pretty much single action armies and 1892s almost all the way. And I'll give you a few exceptions to that coming up, but they didn't go out of their way to find odd stuff. They were too busy trying to get scripts written. So we're going to give the guns to the 4 main characters, and that's going to be it. So this is going to be James Drury and Doug McClure, who played the Virginian and Trampas respectively. And they're the only actors, as I said, to appear in all 9 seasons of the show. So I'll take a brief look at the other 2 characters as well, who were lifted from the novel, which would be the character of Steve Hill and Judge Henry Garth, and try to cover their guns as well. Okay, so if you fast forwarded, avoid all that background, hit play. Because all 4 of the characters on the Virginian carried Colt single-action Army revolvers with 5.5-inch barrels. This is hardly surprising because 5.5-inch barrel was the most commonly sold barrel length in the civilian market in both the 19th century and the early 20th century. So certainly for first and second generation revolvers, you're going to find more 5.5-inch barrel guns than anything else. So it's not surprising that they should crop up all the time. So despite using the same basic guns, the characters' individual firearms had some interesting variations. So we'll talk about those. James Drury, who played the Virginian, he was an actual gun guy. He grew up shooting and hunting, riding horses. He lived on a ranch in eastern Oregon. And consequently, he brought his own gun and holster rig to the Virginian. And that gun was actually pretty interesting. So I'm going to take a little side trip for a second and just talk about the late 1950s, when a fellow named Andy Anderson opened up the Gunfighter shop in North Hollywood, California. Now, up until Andy opened that shop, most of the TV and movie fast draw holster and gun belt rigs were made by a guy named Arvo Ojala, or Ohala. Not really 100% positive how that's pronounced. A lot of people say Ohala, which is a Spanish pronunciation. I think it might be Ojala, which would be, I think, the Finnish pronunciation, but I'm sure some Finns can set me straight on that. So he was the king of fast draw holsters, and he was a fast draw coach, and you'll see him in the early days of Gunsmoke on the intro facing off against, Marshal Matt Dillon. But Andy Anderson came on the scene, and he set up a holster making shop, the Gunfighter shop, where he did some other things as well. But he came up with a new style of fast draw rig that revolutionized the fast draw sport, which was very popular then. And that was the famous walk and draw rig. Now, unlike the drop loop Buscadero style fast draw holsters of the time, and the kind that Ojala made, the walk and draw holster was not worn on a drop loop slotted gun belt. It was worn over the belt like a conventional historical holster. But it had some real differences. It had a longer drop from the top of the holster from the top of the belt loop to the actual holster. And it was canted forward at the toe by 20 degrees. So the pistol had a rake. The barrel was pointing forward on your thigh. The grip was pointing a little bit back. And that allowed you to make a fast draw without breaking your wrist. And it was much easier to clear leather, even though the gun was not held as low. And a lot of fast draw competitors started winning with his rig, the walk and draw rig. And when that happened, a lot of Hollywood stars took notice. So the Anderson walk and draw rigs were seen in Western TV shows like Rawhide, Wagon Train, and on the big screen, Steve McQueen carried one in The Magnificent Seven. And probably the most famous user of Andy Anderson's walk and draw rigs, and the one who I think gave it the most prominence, was Clint Eastwood. And he began using one in Rawhide. And when he began doing Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns, he brought all of his own guns, gear, and even wardrobe. And his Gunfighter rig gained quite a bit of prominence in those movies. And he continued to use them in his early Hollywood big features, like Hang 'em High and Two Mules for Sister Sarah. So you really get to see a lot of these with Clint's westerns, and people loved them. Now, James Drury was also a customer of Andy Anderson's pretty much from the beginning. And he was a big fan of everything that the Gunfighter shop turned out. The walk and draw rig that he used on the show was his own holster and belt. But besides the holster and belt, Drury's single action army was also highly customized by the Gunfighter shop. And besides making holsters, Andy Anderson also made gun grips. And what he made for James Drury was quite different, because he took the grip assembly, the backstrap and trigger guard, from a second model Colt Dragoon revolver and fitted that to Drury's single action Army. And that gave Drury a much bigger grip that fit his hand better and positioned his hand a little farther back from the trigger, which gave him a better length of reach for his trigger finger because he had large hands. And he absolutely loved those grips. And I'll tell you, fitting those grips is not like, say, putting a pair of 1860 Army, a set of 1860 Army grips on a single action Army revolver. I mean, that's a plug and play sort of thing. They just screw on. The Dragoon grips are quite different because they're bigger in almost every dimension than the frame of the single action Army, which means they require quite a bit of metal work to make them work and make them work seamlessly. And Drury's grips look like they grew on the gun. I mean, they're just fantastic. And he absolutely loved them. He used them all the way through the Virginian. In fact, they were his favorite. That single action with those grips was his favorite recreational handgun. He shot that all the time, just purely for pleasure. Now, unfortunately, after the Virginian's run was done, he was filming another Western movie, and they broke his gun during the course of that filming that movie. And he didn't have it for a number of years. But eventually, gunsmith Al Qualls built him a new Colt fitted with a second model Dragoon frame. And the gun felt the same, but it was actually a bit fancier than Drury's original. It was nickel-plated, and it had real stag grips. So it was quite a nice gun. But once again, Drury had a gun that fit his hand, and he was quite happy with that. So that was the Virginian sidearm. Now, Doug McClure, who played Trampas, he actually became real-life best friends with James Drury. And they were best friends for 30 years until Doug McClure died. He died young, unfortunately. But James Drury introduced him to the wonders of the gunfighter shop. So Doug McClure also had a walk and draw rig from Andy Anderson. And he carried his 5.5-inch barreled Colt single action Army in that through the entire show. Now, unlike James Drury and Doug McClure, Gary Clark, who played Steve Hill, he carried his 5.5-inch Colt single action Army revolver in a very standard drop loop Buscadero style holster. So, he kind of broke the mold there. Now, I don't know if that was made by the gunfighter shop or not, because Andy Anderson did make conventional Buscadero rigs and other style rigs for the public and for the movies, so he may well have done that. But at any rate, that's what Steve used. And that brings us to Lee J. Cobb, who played Judge Henry Garth. And Lee J. Cobb's armament was a little bit more varied. Now, his typically seen, because he didn't wear a gun all the time. He was, too important a person for that, right? He had people to do that for him. But when he wore a gun, he typically wore a 5.5-inch barrel Colt single action Army with ivory grips. And very nice gun. But he occasionally had other guns during the series, and the first gun that he had associated with him was a Colt New Service double action revolver. And his had ivory grips, and it appeared in just one episode. And of course, this was the big, 44, 45 caliber gun that was adopted by the military in 1909, and it basically replaced the 1878 double action as Colt's main big bore revolver. It came out in 1898, which is appropriate to the first season of the show, which was set in 1898, so it's not really an anachronism, but it's still quite a surprise to see it. The other gun that pops up is a Colt 1878, which you don't see on too many TV shows. So it was kind of interesting to see it here on the Virginian, and Judge Garth had one of those. So those are the sidearms of the 4 characters in the Virginian. Now we'll take a look at the rifles used, which is pretty simple because, once again, the prop guys did not go crazy with firearms. They used 1892 Winchester lever actions pretty much all the time. So everybody had an 1892 lever action rifle, and off they went to the races. Now, one thing that did come up, because I mentioned before that the ranch hands from the Shiloh Ranch enlisted in the Army and fought in the Spanish-American War. And of course, when they did that, they were armed with trapdoor Springfield rifles. And those show up rather prominently in a couple of the episodes. So we get to see them using the single-shot black powder trapdoor Springfields instead of their 1892 Winchesters. And I'm very happy that they didn't just give them 1892 Winchesters to use on San Juan Hill, which, believe me, some productions would have done. So at least they made that much effort. Well, that is my entire look at the guns of the Virginian. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Give it a thumbs up. Give it a share, make a comment. And I read all the comments, so feel free to tell me everything you think I got wrong in this. I don't have to tell you to do that because I know quite a few of you will do that anyway, but I feel better saying it. It's kind of like I wanted it to happen instead of just having it bushwhack me. So feel free to make a comment, share it with your friends, and until next time, bye.